And one, we are live. Hello and welcome to PropTechBuzz, a podcast channel where we talk to PropTech leaders and founders from all over the world and learn from them how to build, manage, and scale PropTech products, PropTech businesses, PropTech industry. And I'm thrilled to have with me one such veteran today. Her name is Tina. Tina is CEO and co-founder of CircoTrade, a technologically enabled trading platform designed to facilitate and unlock the future value of a building's materials. Tina is an international real estate executive, has over 25 years of experience, including 12 years developing and leading one of the world's largest real estate asset managers with 32 billion euros of assets under management. She has overseen global asset management, major development projects, and sustainable investing across Europe, the UK, and globally. She has also been leading green transformation in the sector by launching Europe's first green bonds and developing decarbonization strategies in line with net zero asset owner alliance commitments. This month, she was officially installed as the 142nd president of RICS. And as president of RICS, Tina leads the organization to advance strategic goals and create positive impact, particularly in the field of sustainability. Tina is also European ambassador for the World Green Buildings Council's a campaign promoting whole life cycle carbon accounting and the circular economy in the European building and construction industry. So as you can see, she's quite a veteran and an obvious choice for us to talk about the theme today, which is the future of ESG. But before we talk about ESG and its future, we would love to get a little context about what Tina does. But let's welcome her. Tina, welcome to PropTechBuzz. How are you doing today?
Hey, thanks, Ravi. Very glad to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me.
The pleasure is mine, Tina. Tina, before we begin ESG, as I said, which is a theme for today, we would like to understand your organization, CircoTrade. Okay, I want to understand CircoTrade, then we come to RICS, and then we talk about ESG. So why don't you tell us a bit about what CircoTrade is all about?
Yeah, so Trade was really born out of the knowledge that today we have a huge carbon issue. And the built natural environment is a huge part of that carbon issue. We need to decarbonize. But we're continuing to build a city the size of Paris every week globally. And so we're not going to stop building, but we need to build wiser and we need to be much more efficient with the use of the materials that we use to build. And it came to my attention that only 1% of the building's materials is actually being reused. The rest is mainly downcycled, if not put to landfill. And we need to stop being so wasteful. But the problem is that I saw was that owners of buildings don't know what they have in their buildings until they actually start demolishing. And then it's really too late to do anything about it. So what CircoTrade does is it turns things around. It uses the principle of futures trading to give certainty to those building owners on what they have, how much it's worth, and whether or not there's a market to buy it. And once they have actually traded the future materials, then they can deconstruct, requalify, recondition those materials, and make it so that those materials can actually be reused as such rather than being mangled in with a big wrecking ball and then either put to being grading roadways or being resmelted when it comes to the metals, which uses a huge amount. We say we recycle metals, but it uses a huge amount of carbon to recycle those metals. So we need to be reusing them and protecting them for future uses. So that's the whole idea, is futures trading. It's a trading platform and a trading contract. Very innovative.
Excellent. And how long has this organization been for now?
So I've been developing the concept and futures trading for the last 2 years.
Nice. I also mentioned that you are the 142nd president of RISC. Now, I've spoken to a few people, especially in the US, and there were few people who did not know much about RICS. So now that you are the new president, could you explain what RICS is and what is its role globally?
Yes. So RICS is actually a professional organization of 134,000 members across the world. And there are some in the US, as well as obviously the UK, where the organization was founded initially 156 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. So there's less presidents than there are years of history, okay? And yes, so as a professional organization, a professional body, we actually promote all of the professions within the built and natural environment by developing standards, global standards, which are widely recognized across the globe. And also by certifying our members and qualifying them, which gives them a stamp of approval in their ways of working, in their trustworthiness. So the idea is that we uphold the public interest through our charter. We're a chartered professional body. And so we uphold the public interest through our charter and through the standards, the training, the thought leadership, and many other topics that we lead on as an organization. Hopefully that answered your question.
Sure. I didn't realize it is such an old organization, though. So as the president of RICS, what is your role and what are your priorities in your stint as president?
Right. So the role of president, the presidential team is made up of 3 people. And there's a senior vice president, a president-elect, and then a president. And actually, it means that you have the opportunity when you become senior vice president to go through what I'm going to call the presidential track. So you have 3 years or 2 years to prepare your 3rd year, which is the presidential year. So what I've been working on preparing that I'm going to roll out this year and what I'll be focusing on with the organization is to support our membership and our sector at large to become a force for good in the combat against climate change. I think we all recognize that the built environment is responsible for 40% of our CO2 emissions globally. We're also responsible for over 1/3 of waste streams globally, and about 1/2 of all of our extracted essential materials that are extracted from the earth, our primary resources. So we have a huge impact on the environment and on the planet. And we need to take responsibility for that. So under my presidency, RICS will lead the sector to take responsibility and to supply solutions that will allow us to support decarbonizing our built environment, also creating more resilient cities and countrysides, and providing a much more environmentally sustainable planet. So those are really my goals. And within that, or maybe I should stop for a question there, because within that I have 2 main themes I'll be working on. But please, Ravi, I think you had a question.
No, please continue. You mentioned about the 2 themes. What are those 2 themes?
Yeah, so the first theme is decarbonizing the built environment. And that really, in order to decarbonize or to take carbon out of what we build and the way we manage buildings and what we do with buildings at their end of life, means that we need to be measuring to manage. RICS has developed the 2nd edition of their leading standard, which is called the RICS Whole Life Carbon Assessment Standard. And it is a methodology for how to measure carbon within projects throughout their entire life cycle. And it's going to be key to roll out that new standard, which came out late September of last year. This year, the focus is on rolling it out, ensuring that it's widely adopted because we can't really, today there's more and more corporations, more and more nations and cities that are signed up to net zero pledges. However, and their reporting needs to report something that is measurable against international standards that are known and certified and verified. And this is what the RICS standard plans to do, is really provide that level playing field, because what you measure, you can then manage and reduce, the goal being to reduce our carbon along to ensure that we meet our net zero goals by 2050.
Got it. And
So
what was your second theme?
And the second theme is the circular economy. So it's all about creating less waste, being more resource efficient. And what I'm planning to do there with RICS is we are convening a do tank rather than a think tank. We're convening a do tank of doers who will pledge to pragmatically undertake reuse of materials within their buildings, whether it be new developments using reused materials, or whether it be the responsible demounting and putting on the market of their existing materials from buildings that they are stripping out or renovating. And the idea behind the Do Tank is to create also a core team of support, which will be there with bankers, insurers, planners, urban planners, engineers, architects, the whole gamut, which will be there to support the doers in fine-tuning and finding the solutions to the way things need to be carried out. So those are my two main themes of the year.
I love the do tank against think tank. I had a similar question for you, because you mentioned that you have a whole life assessment standards, but you are a professional body, right? Although you are a big professional body, how do you ensure that when you come up with such standards, it actually gets adopted on the ground by these corporates, by these companies?
Yeah, so oftentimes our standards are built in coalitions with a number of other parties. It's the case of some of our earlier standards, the ICMS, which is the International Construction Measurement Standard, which is a coalition of 49 organizations worldwide. We also have the IPMS, which is the International Property Measurement Standard, also built in coalition. This last standard, the whole life cycle carbon, was built with 2 phases of public consultation. We also used a third-party team to actually redact the standard and to bring in specialists from across the board to input into the standard itself. We also had over 1,200 inputs from professional bodies and organizations and individuals across the world that inputted into the consultation phase of the standard. So it's quite widely consulted on. And then finally, and very recently, we have received a letter of support from the ICMS coalition, 49 organizations worldwide, that they support using the RICS whole life cycle assessment standard. So that's one way of getting buy-in. The other way is something that we're going to be doing in March as a follow-up to the Buildings Breakthrough Initiative, which was announced during the COP28. The Buildings Breakthrough Initiative is 28 nations that have signed on to having their buildings be near zero carbon, and resilient by 2030. So needless to say, that's practically tomorrow. So the follow-up to that announcement and that pledge by those 28 countries is a very important meeting, and a ministerial meeting that's going to happen in Paris in early March of this year. And it's at that meeting that we hope to garner support from various countries to start using our standard and referencing it within their public policy.
Got it. In relation to that, which is the theme for today, so all the ESG initiatives that were mandated because of the net zero pledge, give us a sense of where we are since ever since this got rolled out. Give us a sense of ESG's real impact after all these years. Has it fulfilled its promise? Has it not? What has been the challenges? Could you give us a sense of today, and then I'm going to ask the role in the future.
Yeah, so I think we've come a really long way. These themes, maybe it wasn't called ESG at the time, but these themes around environmental sustainability, wider sustainability issues, have been present in the sector of property and real estate for a very long time. But they were still quite niche practices for a very long time. And I think what started getting more visibility and more take up was when things like LEED or BREEAM certifications came onto the market. It was at that stage, and that's in the early 2000s. So it seems like a long time ago. But that was when, in the early 2000s, these new labels came out, sustainable building labels. And then probably into the 2010s before there was actually take up. So historically, we see between the arrival of a label and actual sort of large percentages of the market taking up that sort of label, there was a good 10 years, maybe 15. So this is something that you need to keep in mind, that we have a fairly slow-moving sector, but things have accelerated of late because of the pressure on our sector to step up and to be responsible when it comes to decarbonizing the built environment. I think there is much more pressure today. It's not only what happened in the first phase it was market demand that led it. I think today we have something that's going to be led largely by regulation and pushed by the market. So there's a double movement here. You have some very strong regulation coming out in Europe, for instance. The EU has set up, for instance, more lately, probably the most impactful piece of legislation for sustainability in the built environment is what's called the EPBD. So that's the Energy Efficiency Buildings Directive, Energy Performance Buildings Directive. And that is going to require that all new buildings actually meet a certain number of carbon and energy efficiency standards over the next few years. And it's going to ramp up and cover up more and more. And it is requiring, because this is at EU level, that each nation sets their own plan and their own thresholds of energy and carbon that need to be met for all new buildings and all major renovations. And that is going to be put into place in the next few years. It's coming. The plans need to be in place by 2025, the implementation by 2027 and 2028. So this is going to be a huge impact on the way things are built and renovated.
Got it. You keep mentioning about EU. What about the rest of the world? Are they any better? Are they catching up? Do you have a sense of the rest of the world's initiatives?
Yeah, of course. And I mentioned the EU because the EU has been in a leading position, I think, very early on under Ursula von der Leyen, who was the chief commissioner of the EU. She put into place a very, very ambitious climate law, which has been therefore building up this legislation, and it touches, all the nations, the 27 nations of the EU. So that's a huge impact. But I think if you're looking at the US, I can't say enough about the IRA. The Inflation Reduction Act has been immensely powerful in developing new technologies for carbon capture, but also for renewable energy. And I think that sort of legislation is absolutely going to put, for instance, the US on the front foot when it comes to being at the leading edge of implementing these new green technologies. So that's something that's really important. And then I think, we obviously can't ignore the UK that has their own, which was part of Europe, as you know, until very recently, and has their own, legislation for carbon zero and their carbon goals. And the UK has actually been immensely successful in reducing their carbon when you look at the amount of offshore wind and other renewable technologies that have been put in place. So I think we can say that, in a large part of the world, there are very, very innovative things going on.
Nice. So, Tita, in preparation to this podcast, we also shared this to our community on PropTechBuzz on LinkedIn, and we asked people to post any questions. So we got a few questions which I'm gonna pull up on the screen here, just so that we can read them out. So some questions are, wait, yeah, I think yes, this is it. This is so for those of you who do not know. So this is the discussion board that where we said add your questions that you want us to ask to Tina, and this comes from Scott. Scott is from the US, and he says, "Are there any regulations that you feel will have an outsized impact on the focus of ESG initiatives this year?" I think you briefly touched upon, but do you want to answer that again?
Yeah, I think actually I probably more than briefly touched upon. When I was talking about the EPBD for Europe, but there's also other legislation coming forth in Europe. I think the IRA in the US. I think those are the main that are really going to be impacting ESG this year, and especially
Got
the
it. Got it.
E in ESG. Yeah, absolutely.
The E in ESG. By the way, is the SNG primarily not much of significance? Because whenever we talk about ESG, we always mean the E part of ESG. Am I right? Like it,
Well, I think maybe you have that impression because we're perhaps in a technical business, and where the E is very pragmatically, it's not easy, but let's say it's the lowest hanging fruit. It's not low hanging, but it's the lowest hanging. So it's measurable. We have methodologies to measure it. We can benchmark it. We can reduce it. I think when it comes to the S and the G, so the social and the governance, we're talking about things that are much less quantifiable in a sense, but no less important, of course, very, very important. And I think it's just a question of really putting our minds to task, but very, very important.
got it. There is maybe a second question here. Yeah, so this came from a Wall Street Journal article that came just last week, became quite viral, and it says that ESG is becoming a dirty word for many corporates. They're switching to alternatives like responsible business to describe corporate initiatives. Were you aware of this article? It became hugely viral.
So, I have to say that this is not as much of a topic across the pond. I think perhaps in the US, it has become perhaps a topic much more so and has become very partisan. I see that less happening on this side of the pond, meaning in the UK and in most of Europe.
Got it.
But yeah, I
But
think it's
what is the bone of contention? What is the topic of being partisan? Like where is the opinion divided?
I think you have to look at it this way. I think what some people consider, of course, on all three topics, that being environmentally conscious or socially conscious and wanting to produce and protect our planet for future generations and for a better world, that is seen, I think wrongly so, as being socially progressive. I think that it really is much more a question of a pragmatic question is, and this is happening today. It's no longer even for generations of the future. This is today's issue. We have huge climate impact of outsized climate events happening across the board in all regions of the world. And those will only amplify in time. And I think the scientists of the IPCC report, which is widely, taken on board by all the major countries in the world and been approved. The scientists have shown that global warming is the result of human, interaction with our environment. So I don't think there can be any question on that. I don't think it's about climate skepticism. It's more about, I think, understanding what our responsibilities are for ourselves, for the planet, and for the generations to come.
Got it. Thank you. And we'll take a quick last question here from Shreya. Shreya says, how can you empower your industry other than through regulations to better uphold ESG standards in their individual roles and companies?
So, we talked a lot about regulation because it's the thing that's above the radar screen and everyone knows that it's out there. But I don't think we can underestimate the power of the consumer. And in the consumer for real estate industry and the construction industry, the consumer is actually the end user of those buildings or the corporates that will be using those buildings. And I think there's a huge amount of power in them basically voting with their feet. They will go into buildings, and we see it actually in RICS's most latest commercial monitor, that buildings that are considered, top class, highly sustainable, healthy buildings, those buildings are having no problem renting out. Their values are holding up quite well. Whereby secondary buildings that have less credentials, less environmental support are struggling and are seeing, are having a hard time obtaining tenants in some cases, or obtaining the sort of premium rents that they would like. So I think that that in itself is going to be pushing the industry towards where the market is asking for it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I have a last question here on. So what we did on our platform is we also created a platform where we are trying to structure the entire ecosystem in terms of, say, ESG reporting and compliance players. And this place is also getting crowded with lots of players trying to solve it. So we have tried to consolidate all the players across the globe and brought them under one umbrella. My last question here to you is, how do you see these number of startups coming up trying to solve for ESG reporting, ESG compliance? What is the kind of activity that you see startups playing a role here?
Yeah, I think startups will play a huge role in facilitating and streamlining a number of ESG issues, because the issues that for reporting, for measurement, they require huge amounts of data. And it's no longer on an Excel spreadsheet that's going to be managed. So I think things like AI with its predictive algorithms, as well as the machine learning side, as well as blockchain to traceability of different elements. I think there's a huge playground for technology to support sustainable initiatives across the board. So I think that these startups are part of that ecosystem. It's part of where we need to get in order to actually be effective in meeting our goals.
Excellent. Well, this brings us to the end of a very thought-provoking conversation with Tina. Tina, thank you for taking time out and sharing with us your wealth of knowledge and wisdom. And I hope this interview reaches out to the masses, to our network, and more people benefit from this. Thank you so much, Tina, for your time.
And Ravi, thank you. It was a pleasure to chat together. Thanks for having me.
Same here, Tina.